respond as quickly as I can. Today is December 30th, 2020. This is a sort of a goal inspiration class that I hold at the end of every year. I did miss last year, I apologize, but I try to hold at the end of every year to get everything ready and prepared for the next year, at least my mindset, if nothing else. So today we're going to talk about goals, and really I like to talk about the why of goals as much as the how of goals, and we're going to try to cover as much of that as we can today. And so, I'd like to share my feelings about goal setting in the sense of what it's done for me. I'm not like some super organized person or a motivated go-getter or anything along those lines. And oftentimes when we hear about goals and goal setting and all that, we associate it with a particular like type A personality type. And if we don't fit that type, we go, well, it's not quite for me, or isn't quite what I do. And while all that's understandable, the amazing and cool thing about goals is when you write them down, there's some science that happens and possibly some magic as well, because I can't explain some of it, but we're going to talk about that. For me, this past year, 2020, as for all of us, was most certainly an unusual year, and one that I had not planned for or had expected. But it was also one where a 10 or 12-year goal was fulfilled, a 4 or 5-year goal was fulfilled, and a 40-year goal was fulfilled. So again, when I write out my goals and I deal with my goals, it's more about like starting to create the blueprints or the plan for how I'm going to move forward into whatever it is that I might be undertaking. And so this is really the idea of goals, is it's you have a space where you dream, where you imagine, where you hope. I mean, these are all the things that we all do. And really the only difference between a dream and a goal is typically a goal has a lot more structure around it, including a timeline. But one of the main reasons why I think that goals are very effective, even if you're not like the super organized person and a go-getter, what happens when we start to write our goals down, particularly on paper, or we get them out, what happens is our eyeball is directly connected to the reptilian part of our brain, where the core, the amygdala sits, and the brain stem, and all that good stuff that existed or that exists, let's say, in reptiles. They don't have a limbic area where like emotion sits and things along those lines, nor do they have a prefrontal cortex that's exclusive to humans. So anyways, your eyeball is directly attached to that part of your brain. And that part of your brain is responsible for a lot of things. In particular, it's responsible for filtering out all the things that would be distraction and allowing you to focus on what you need to focus on. So, thousands of years ago, as we were running through the plains and we had to focus on our game, we would focus on the game intently and not be distracted by the birds. And you'll still see this today. 4 or 5 different times in my life, ironically, currently, I have lived by fire stations. And they are busy fire stations. But to be honest with you, I never hear them leave. What I'm going to call my superconscious has filtered all that out instead of subconscious. But my superconscious has filtered all that out and is allowing me to focus on what I need to focus on. But if I hear that same alarm as I'm driving down the road, that same siren as I'm driving down the road, of course I hear it. My superconscious allows that to get through. Well, it's the same thing when you write your goals. When you write your goals, you're telling that part of your brain, hey, if you see anything that's important to me, make sure that you bring my attention to it. I'll give you an example. Maybe you or someone close to you has purchased a new car to them. It may not be a new car, but it's new to them. And maybe you hadn't seen this car very often before. And then all of a sudden, after you purchase the car, or your mom did, or whatever the case may be, you start seeing it everywhere. You see it in different colors. You see it in different model years. All of a sudden, it starts to pop out where you never saw it before. But in your mind, this car now became important. So now, all these cars that were filtered out before, you see. Well, it's the same with your goals. When you write down, hey, I want a trip to Hawaii, pretty soon all these deals start to seem to pop up to Hawaii, and Hawaii seems to be all over the place. Well, it was there all along. But now, because you've given the instruction to your superconscious, now it knows what to look for, and what to bring your attention to. So, if for no other reason, to be able to move you closer to what you want, or maybe to put it better, to not miss and not filter out what's important to you. There's one reason to write out the goals. It's extremely important to write out goals. I've heard a lot of people tell me they have goals, but they don't write them out. There's something about that eyeball, reptilian brain connection that works extremely well. And the other, well, there's lots of reasons, but another reason I like to mention for writing out goals is if you happen to have difficulty with decisions, or, I mean, we all have difficulty with major decisions. But what's nice is that when you have a goal, or you have a set of goals, you can ask yourself, does this get me closer to my goal, or doesn't it? It's that simple. And if it gets you closer to your goal, then obviously do it. If it takes you away from your goal, then avoid it. Obviously some decisions aren't going to have anything to do with our goals, but usually if we have good goals for ourselves, the major decisions in our lives are most certainly influenced by the goals that we have. And so when you start to write out goals for yourself, you're starting to write out almost like a roadmap, one that makes it much easier when you come to that fork in the road and have to decide which way to go. So again, between that super conscious bringing to your awareness to the goal that you listed, combined with the now super ability or the easy ability to make a decision, it really makes no sense not to make goals. But we'll get more into that. This past year has been a brutal year for a lot of people. It's been very, very difficult. And of course, my friends in Minsk, I'm quite well aware of the situation that you guys are going through as well. And there's just storms. There's storms in life that occur that we can't get around, right? It just, no matter what the case is, there was no one on this globe that was going to get around COVID. There might be some places still that don't have it, but for the most part, everybody has been affected significantly about it. And when these storms come, well, again, the goals that you have can really make a big difference in how you walk through these and how you survive through them. And I use that word survive specifically. If you're not familiar with Viktor Frankl's In Search of Meaning, Man's Search of Meaning, I think is what the name of the book is. Viktor Frankl was an Auschwitz survivor and a psychiatrist. And he happened to recognize that people who had a clear idea of what they were living for, in other words, they had goals, they had some piece of work that they were working on, or they had family members they wanted to see, or they had something that they wanted to have a sense of continuation with, he noticed that their odds of survival were significantly, exponentially greater than those who didn't have it. So basically, when we have goals that are meaningful to us, when we find ourselves in a storm, like we may find ourselves in right now, it's the meaning of those goals oftentimes that carries us through that. It keeps us from just laying down and giving up. I've had a lot of situations in my life. I never know, what's going to happen when that phone rings. I've come to understand and appreciate. And by having my goals in place, if when that phone rings or that situation happens, if it's bad news, at least if nothing else, I have my goals to fall back on. I know that even if my mind is all and going crazy, I can fall back and ground myself on my goals. And then, of course, not only does it sort of, give me the meaning and give me the much needed reason to move forward through the storm, you know, as storms come. I mean, as whether it be the politics in Belarus or whether it be COVID or any other situation, obviously as they pass, you're off course. What you had planned and the timeline you had planned and the way that you had planned and all that kind of good stuff before the storm now is been altered. Either you're off course, you no longer find yourself where you were, there's new constraints you're having to deal with, there may not be the same amount of resources, whatever the case may be. And when we have a good set of goals, what this allows us to do is to get back on track. So if I, leave New York and I'm going to head to London in a boat and I hit a storm along the way, well, I know I was heading to London. So even if I got blown so far off course, I'm down at the, Cape of Matterhorn, I'm still going to be able to find my way back because I know my destination. And this is very, very important and probably one of the most essential parts of goals, and really in particular when it comes to business plans. Because, that's really what a business plan is. It's a set of goals that a business wants to achieve. Too many times businesses treat a business plan as a way to get money, a way for funding. Let me show you what our plan is. And while, yes, of course, it's important to have a plan, but those are really goals and things that you're trying to achieve. And if you're not taking out your business plan and reviewing it at least once a month with the staff who are involved, your upper management, you're not going for your business either. And so, but if you've done a formal business plan and you've seen how it breaks down, then you understand goals, and it's the same kind of application, maybe not as thorough or as detailed, but as in your personal goals. So, I could go on and on and on about the reason of why goals are important. I think for me personally, the most important reason is the satisfaction that I get when I achieve goals. This year was a fantastic year for me, in spite of what went on with the storm, in spite of what went on with COVID. And I haven't been able to see any of my friends in Belarus since last February, and this whole situation has been horrible. But while all that, let's say, discomfort and crap has been going on, like I said, several of my goals, these are multi-year goals, have been achieved. And so, this is really if I would say any other reason, it's really they say the number one quality you could have for success is persistence. And when I have a goal, persistence follows. When I don't have a goal, I might get there. I'm going to share one graphic in this course with you guys that, when we do the edited version, I may have more graphics, but here in the live version, and the idea is that oftentimes when we're talking about goals, we're talking about, we get in our mind some kind of bigger than life, or we have to be altruistic, or a purpose gets driven in with it a lot. And while I understand that, and I think that knowing your purpose is a great thing, it's also a difficult thing. I've had many professions. I've found myself in many situations. I'm talking dozens of different employment and work situations, and most of that was to figure out what my purpose was not. And so, I'm not a big believer in saying, hey, everything really, rides on your purpose. It is a truth that your purpose really does drive a lot. So I'm not trying to minimize that. But I think sometimes the learning what passion looks like, learning what people who have a purpose, how they operate, and what their habits are some of the more important things that we can take a look at. I'll give you a good example, actually. So I invited a friend of mine in Minsk to this course. He's extremely successful. I have my nickname for him. I call him Golden Boy. He knows it. It's a term of endearment because he just really is amazingly successful. He's had a lot of success. And I invited him to the class, and he responded, and he said, Matt, wow, isn't it cool how attraction works? I happen to be going through an online goal course for myself right now. And so, here's a guy he's in the millions of dollars. He lives in Minsk. You know that he pretty much would never have to work again if he didn't want to. He has he's achieved levels of success that most of us would be envious of, without a doubt. Yet he is still writing goals for himself because he understands that with the goal, he's able to commit to whatever that may be. And whatever your purpose is, whatever your passion is, whatever it may be, it's going to require that same level of, let's say, commitment, or whatever the case may be, that same persistence, that same getting back when when you fall. It's just the way that it is. And one of the, let's see if I can bring it up here. One of my favorite graphics that sort of goes this, and it's really a method. It's not just a graphic. It's called a Ikigai. It's from Japan, and the idea is, I have this graphic up here. I think you guys can see it. The idea is that really helping you identify, Ikigai is sort of like being in that sweet spot in your life. You may have experienced it while you were in some type of athletic or music performance, something where you get into the zone. Well, Ikigai would be sort of like the zone for your life. And if you take a look at this, Venn diagram that we have here, you basically start with four things. You start with, what do you love? What are you good at? What is it that the world needs? And what is it that you can get paid for? And if you can find the cross section of those four ideas, that's your Ikigai. I know for myself, it probably wasn't until I was in my late 40s till I found my Ikigai. But I spent a lot of time manipulating it, figuring it out, asking myself these questions, right? That which you love, that which you're good at, that which the world needs, and that you can be paid for. This is a good spot to talk about being authentic. And when I say authentic, obviously be authentic with all the people in your life. It's absolutely the best policy. But really what I'm saying is that your goals need to be for you. They need to be your goals. I don't know. Well, I'll tell you a story. Many years ago, I was living in Tucson, Arizona. And Tucson is geographically a very beautiful part of the world. And it's in a valley. And the foothills, or the mountains around it, there's homes that are built up into these mountains. And they look down over the city. And of course, they're expensive homes, nice homes. And I had at that point a goal that was on my goal list of a $7 million house in the foothills that was the highest point looking over Tucson. And every morning I would write out that goal, and I was working on it. And maybe about 2 months in, I had a client who had invited me to a client of his house up in the foothills. The guy owned a Cadillac dealership, and of course I was like, yeah, I'd love to see it. So I went up, and this house was at the highest point in Tucson. And it was beautiful. I don't think it was a Frank Lloyd Wright house, but it was like that. The stone and the architecture blended into the mountain, beautiful. Had an infinity pool that dropped over into Tucson. I mean, it was just an absolutely gorgeous house. And as we walked through the house, it's my habit to always ask people how much they paid for things and things along those lines. So I asked him, I go, how much did you pay for this house? And he goes, well, I paid $7 million for this house. So I'm literally at this point standing in my dream home, my goal home. I couldn't say really dream home, because what I discovered, well, my next question really revealed everything to me. I said, well, wow, what's the yearly maintenance on the house? And he said, oh, somewhere between $175,000 and $200,000. And I knew right then the house wasn't for me. It wasn't the money, but I understood the responsibility. That meant you probably had a house manager, and you had people you had to coordinate. And there was $200,000 worth of activity to coordinate in this house. And I'm not big on the responsibility front. I'd rather not. I'd rather have less responsibilities like that in my life. And so I realized as I was sitting there, this is not my goal. This is not my dream. What I was doing was I was goaling for what I thought other people would see as success. I was goaling for an image, not goaling for who I was or what I was authentic to. So this is where this Ikigai really comes in nice, is that if you can start to really work on these 4 questions and you start to build your goals around them, you'll find yourself in situations that draw you closer to these 4 positions so that you can have that cross section or that Venn diagram of the of your purpose in life, let's so to speak. So as we go from goals to see if we can get back here. So as we go from the idea of why the goals and how do we goal and where do we go from there, a lot of that is going to be so the goals that you had last year and the years previous that you achieved, they really are expectations. They are they should now be what you know you can achieve. So in other words, if I accomplish at one point in my life, I had a goal that was $75,000 a year. That was 20 years ago or so. And so once I achieved $75,000 a year, it became my baseline. I expected to make $75,000 a year. Now, mind you, I haven't always made $75,000 a year, but the fact of the matter is that I've made some years I've made much more, but it's given me something to sort of use as a baseline for my goals to move forward. So expectations are just yesterday's goals that are now being applied to tomorrow. So in that sense, when we, excuse me, I lost my train of thought there. When we, I wanted to say this, in that sense of expectations, the only thing you can really do with expectations is place them on yourself. You cannot really place expectations on anybody else. Because if you do, the problem comes because an expectation on someone else is a premeditated resentment, basically. And a premeditated, if I have an expectation on you, I have no real control to be able for you to deliver it other than maybe force or persuasion. And if you still don't do it, then all of a sudden I become pissed or whatever the case may be. So when I'm talking about expectations, I'm not talking about expectations on other people, nor am I talking about some type of goal for other people. Really, the only thing that you can do and the only thing you can have expectations for is yourself. There is no one else that you can expect to have expectations for. So anyways, long story short, as you're walking through and you're preparing and you're reviewing last year, and let's say you review last year, particularly this would be a good year to think about it. A lot of times, many of my years, I walked 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. I still had a step forward. And even the years where I took just 3 steps backwards, I didn't even really make it a step forward, or I didn't have let's say a net gain. Those years were still, I had to get through certain things to be able to get to my goals. And sometimes when we make really big goals for ourselves, the challenges that we have and the things that we have to get through to get to that, we have to work through as well. So, this is why you can't be disappointed if you don't meet a goal. Where, if you want to be disappointed in yourself for not meeting an expectation, that's okay, as long as you're actually using it in a sense to be able to better yourself and figure out what went wrong and what went left and whatever the case may be. For those of you who know about the SMART goal method, many of you may have heard that the acronym SMART when it comes to goals. You have basically specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and on a timeline. People have used those five ideas and that acronym for goals for as long as I can remember. I've heard that acronym. I like to add a sixth letter, a Y, SMARTY goals. So they're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're on a timeline, and they're about you. You cannot goal for anybody else, nor can your goals really be dependent on anybody else. If your goals are, I want to marry, Jennifer Aniston, right? You can't really goal that. That involves Jennifer Aniston's goals as well, or whatever the case may be. And so I like to use the SMARTY method. I like to, if you go back to that house I described in my goal list many years ago, that was not really about me. That was about somebody else. And if I goal for somebody else or put somebody else in my goal, it really is setting me up for some type of resentment, because now I'm placing the expectation or the achievement of my goal on someone else. And as a team, I can create goals, and as I should say, we can create goals. But as an individual, I have to create only goals for myself. There's typically three types of goals as you're building goals and you're writing out goals for yourself that I would suggest that you take a look at. There's the goals that you have, meaning that, hey, what are the things I want to have in my life? What are the things that will give me, happiness, whatever that may be. So, two of my have things I actually achieved this year. They ended up on I think one of them was about 12 years ago. I wanted to buy a $60,000 car. At the time, it was a Maserati. I didn't, but it really was more about the price to me. I had that number in my head. I had not been able to purchase a car for that much before. And so this past year, I bought myself a Tesla, and I achieved that goal. And of course, it was satisfying. That's a have goal. Another goal I had was to have small houseboats in areas where I have family, so that I could have like a small dacha in those areas, a place to stay when I went. And this past year, I also bought a small boat, and I could live aboard it and do exactly what I'm wanting. But these were goals that had to have been created several years ago, and then when they've come, and they came this past year, of course, I felt great. But these are have goals. To be honest with you, as soon as I got them, all right. And that's the thing about most of the things that we have. The desire to have it isn't the same as the feeling of possessing it. Those are two different things oftentimes. And so my have goals, I don't tend to go for many things to have anymore. It's just not something I'm as interested in. And but of course, I'm in my 50s and life is changing. If I had children, those goals would be different. The other type of goal, you have goals and you have do goals, right? The kind of goals where what do you want to go do? What are the experiences that you want to have? For many of you, I met you as a result of my do goals, of getting out into the world and traveling around and meeting lots of people and interacting and learning and yada, yada, yada. Excuse me. Many of my friendships that I have now around the world were because a result of 12 years ago, I said, I want to travel, and I want to travel frequently. As far as a lesson to being specific, I was not specific in how I wanted to travel or what I wanted to travel. And shortly thereafter, setting that goal, I found myself traveling to take care of my sick stepfather. I was in Florida 2 weeks and then Arizona for 2 weeks, and I did this for about a year and a half back and forth. And I traveled a lot. I fulfilled that goal, but I wasn't specific. It's almost like the deal with the devil, right? You need to make sure that you understand, you've defined what the goal that you want is, that first specific, that first letter in the SMART. So as I started to understand that and I started to make my goals more specific, I made my goals to particular places I wanted to see and people I wanted to meet, and all of a sudden those things started to occur. But again, these are do goals, right? So we have goals, things we want to have, and then we have do goals, things we want to do. The third category of goals are what I call be goals, right? What do you want to be? And it's interesting to me because the sense of being is different than the sense of possession. In both those first two categories, there's a sense of possession in them. Of course, I have an item, I have a mouse, or I have a car, or whatever that might be. I possess it. But also experiences, right? We're possessing experiences, and it most certainly feels that way in today's social media, where people are cataloging and inventorying their experiences and sharing them online. But again, these are experiences that we're having. To be is a different quality. It's a different state. And I'm not sure anyone can ever take it away from you once you are it. So in other words, there's a story. I used to have, I play a lot of poker, and used to have a home poker game, and I had a friend who came, and my daughter happened to be at the poker game, and my daughter asked her, she said, well, Layla, what do you do? What do you like to do? And Layla goes, oh, I like plants. I work with plants a lot. And so my daughter responded, she goes, oh, you're a horticulturist. And in my asshole mind at that moment, I went, yeah, horticulturist, right? Because I knew Layla had a background like mine. She didn't graduate college, and she didn't have a piece of paper that qualified her in that college sense. But that didn't keep her from being a horticulturist. And I caught myself. I realized in my mental dialogue, when I went sarcastic, I caught myself and corrected myself and realized that she can be anything she wants to be. I can be a dentist, or I could be a brain surgeon if I want to be. Now, whether or not you'll actually let me work on your teeth or let me work on your brain might be a different question, a different question. But the fact of the matter is, there's a sense of being for that can be in your goals as well. What do you want to be? We were asked that as children a lot. What do you want to be when you grow up? And to be honest with you, the first, 45 years of my childhood were the hardest. And I'm still figuring out what I want to be. And I've been some things. I've been a dad. I've been a husband. I've been, and now I'm a friend. I guess I'm still a dad. And but long story short, to me, these are the goals that I feel are the most enriching for me, are the ones on where I want to be, because all these other things will sort of play out if I can figure out what I want to be. So, and if you go back to that Ikigai graphic, a lot of that is really about being. It's talking about, what do you love? What are you good at? What can you give the world? A lot of this is your being in your place. It's really addressing that very sense. And so, again, you have to sort of sit down and take the time and write out goals, and there's a self-inventory. Unfortunately, I meant to put a link in it on the email, or on whatever I happen to reach out to you by. My email is Matt, M-A-T-T, at PINCKINC.com. Again, that's PINCKINC.com. If you send me an email, I will send you a self-inventory list or a worksheet that's from my workbook. And the self-inventory will help you sort of become that being that you want to become. So, reach out to me if you're interested in it. I'll send it to you. It's an appendix from the workbook that I have it's a companion workbook with Think and Grow Rich. A link for it is in the description. And but long story short, if you do that, I'll send it to you. It really takes several hours. I would say a day or two of solitude, a weekend of sitting down and reading them over and considering them, contemplating them, and creating a self-inventory for yourself. I don't know if you've ever done this or not, but I know people who spend hours, if not days or weeks, planning their vacations, but they don't spend 15 minutes planning the life that they want. And so, to me, this is really what it's about. So, anyways, I have an exercise that I like to assign people when they start to work with me, and It's very difficult, and very few people ever, if I don't know if actually anyone that I know of has actually hit the number on the first try. But there's an exercise I like, and basically the exercise has to do with it's getting you and it's getting your brain in the habit of thinking about goals and goaling for yourself throughout the day. So the exercise is write out 100 goals. 100 goals, it could be anything. What do you want to have? What do you want to do? What do you want to be? It can be simple, it can be big, it can be, ridiculous, it can be whatever it is. You write out 100 goals. And the idea, when you write out 100 goals, you start to really go into yourself and figure out what is it that I really want. And when you start to do this year after year, and you start to see how many of the things on your last list you actually accomplished the year before, you start to like treat it more like a Christmas list. Like, hey, dear Santa, this is what I want. Because you start to understand the power of it. In fact, someone I invited to this course, another person, back in October, we had spoken, they had some time on their hands. I said, well, write out 100 goals. Since you got time on your hands, do this. And again, I don't think he made the 100 goals, but when we were talking about this course, he shared with me that he had done that, and he was surprised how many of the things on his list he had accomplished. It's only been a couple months. And so, but it not only shows this, like, how many things that we can accomplish and how effective goaling is, but it becomes this really sort of feedback loop for us about really thinking about what we want. And as we do that, we start to get in the habit of doing that. And as we create that habit for ourselves, the identifying what it is that we want becomes more authentic. I was about to say easier, but I don't think easier is the right word, but I think authentic. And so this is really the idea of the 100 goals. And I do this almost with anything. Let me see if I can pull this up. I'm in the midst of writing another book right now. And, oops, let me see if I can pull this up for you just to give you an idea of what I do. This is 100 reasons, and it goes into a second page. But 100 reasons why I should be writing this book, right? And so I use that 100 formula for a lot of different things. It helps me get all the cold water out, get warm water out, and really get to the base of what either the message is, what my desire is, whatever it might be. But my brain is actually being conditioned and trained, and I don't know if you know what neuroplasticity is, but the idea is they used to think that after you were 25 years old, your brain hardened. You weren't going to learn anything new. You weren't going to grow any new brain cells. It was done. But they have since come to learn that that's not the case, that the brain all the way into old age can reroute and rewire new neural networks. And so if you're like I am and you're 50 years old or older, that cognitive loss. You've felt that cognitive loss. I was feeling it significantly about 6 or 7 years ago. And because I was feeling it, I started driving different directions to work. I started putting myself in difficult situations. I started doing things that made my brain exercise and work itself through situations. And now I have to say that I feel much more nimble. I don't feel like I did when I was 20, but I most certainly feel better than I did 6 or 7 years ago. And it's from the exercise of practicing thinking and learning to think. And the reason why this is so important, and I cannot really emphasize this, and there's a great, he's dead now, but he was an inspirational speaker by the name of Earl Nightingale. I highly suggest it. It's all over YouTube. People have taken his material and done different stuff with it, but they refer to him as the voice of God. He has this really nice sort of grandfatherly voice and has a lot of great observations. But one of my favorite observation, and absolutely true that he's made, that rings with everything that I've come to understand, is you become what you think about. Again, you become what you think about. Your thoughts and what you do in your thoughts are what happens to you in your life, whether you realize it or not. Everything starts as a thought, and you become what you think about. Think about that for a second. What are you thinking about? Are you worried? Are you angry? Are you proudful? Are you compassionate? Are you nurturing? Are you understanding? And obviously, as you start to walk through life and you start to get the rewards back for your thinking, it should become very clear if your thinking is effective or not. If your thinking is effective, then you're getting what you want. If you're not getting what you want, I would first look inside and see what I'm thinking. You become what you think about. And as you walk through these exercises, a lot of what we talked about today, whether it be the 100 goals or how the superconscious operates and operating with our focus, a lot of this was based in neurology. And there's rules to neurology, there's rules to chemicals, there's rules to electric interactions. And so even if you say, hey, well, there's no, we're just dust to dust, there's nothing else. The fact of the matter is that there's laws that operate the chemical interactions and reactions that are happening with us. There's external laws and internal laws. I'll give you an example, right? So if you think about the law of gravity, I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? I pick something up, it's going to drop. No one had to explain the law of gravity to you. You learned it, you knew what it was out there. Just like electricity, right? Electricity has existed forever. I mean, as long as we have, longer. I mean, it could be possibly the source of life, right? So, but yet it wasn't until we understood the law of electricity or the laws of gravity that we could start to manipulate and work with them. We could start to harness that. We could start to turn a motor or turn on a light, whatever the case may be, because these are laws that we were able to figure out through the laws of physics or whatever it might be. Well, everything runs by law. The biggest of biggest and the smallest of smallest, there's these rules they figured out, or these patterns that they figured out. And so why would I think that my thinking or that success is exclusionary, is exclusive? It's not actually part of what everything else has been subject to. See, so inner laws are going to be different than outer laws, though, right? I mean, I can count the miles between here and Minsk, or the kilometers between here and Minsk. But how do you count, or how do you measure someone's hope? How do you measure their depression? You can't. That's really something that's internal. And while it may have been, if you go back to the SMART, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time. And then why? If you go back to that, you'll, that measurable really kicks out most feelings. Because how do you measure? I have oftentimes said you cannot goal feelings. You can't goal that you want to be more happy. And while I still agree with that in its purest form, I do believe you can build a cookbook that will help you achieve those feelings. And this is where this idea is going to be the final idea that we talk about today when it comes to goal setting. And this is what we call the cookbook, right? So let's say you've created a set of goals and you have a mental image, and you're able to, bring up that mental image in your mind every morning and every evening, and you're working towards that. The cookbook is sort of like the how-to to get to that, right? And so in sales, cookbooks are relatively easy. And most of you know that I've been in sales a long time, and most of my experience in dealing with people and achieving my goals has come through the sales arena one way or the other. And in a cookbook situation with sales, it's relatively easy. I can say, okay, well, how much money do I want to make next year? And let's say that I'm going to use some easy numbers. Let's say that I want to make $100,000 next year, and I sell widgets that are $10,000 a piece, and I make $1,000 out of each one that I sell. Well, it becomes obvious that I need to sell 100 to be able to make my $100,000. So then I can go, okay, well, I need to make 100. And many companies, you can go into the company, if you're in sales, you can go in and you can see, well, out of how many leads that came, how many of them turned to an opportunity? And let's say that every 10 leads that came, 3 of them turned to an opportunity. And then out of 10 opportunities, 3 of them actually turned, closed to a deal. Well, then you can do the math backwards. You can say, well, 3 basically goes into 100 33 times. And if I want to be able to, find that 330 opportunities that I am going to need to walk through, I'm going to have to, you can back it all the way up to how many people do you have to call. So in other words, if I have to speak to, if I'm cold calling and I have to speak to 20 people to get one to turn into a lead, I can do the math all the way back to that 20 and know, okay, every day I need to be calling 60 people. And so the idea of a cookbook is that you're breaking things down into its smallest sort of unit, that then you can track that behavior. Because see, everything's really going to come down to your behavior as far as your success and your goals. Everything is behavior driven. Everything I've given you today and I've shared today and anything else that I'm going to share with you is useless unless your behavior is, you're driving your behavior and driving it in a way that is successful for you. Oftentimes I'll have people ask me about, or we'll talk about behavior and attitude and technique. And if I ask you guys, obviously I'm not in a live class or you're not getting to respond, but if I said out of behavior, attitude, and technique, what would you say is the most important? And overwhelmingly, the answer I get to that question is attitude. And I agree with it. Attitude is amazingly important. And in general, it is the absolute thing that drives most everything we look at. It's the only thing we really have control over. Other than, which may be just a slight more important, is our behavior. Our behavior, if we allow our behavior to drive our attitude and our technique, then we are actually in control. And that's what a cookbook is about. A cookbook is about breaking it down to the behavior that you have in front of yourself. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I wake up one morning and I'm attitude driven, and attitude drives everything for me. And I wake up one morning and to discover that my girlfriend has left me and my dog has died. And I miss my dog a lot, right? And I'm really down and depressed, and I go to work, and do you think I'm gonna make my calls? Do you think I'm gonna be in the space that I really wanna, do anything? I'm probably gonna be pretty depressed that day. I might even call in sick that day, right? Because again, my attitude is driving everything. But if I take that same day, and rather than having my attitude drive it, I have my behavior drive it, what happens is I get to work, I make my 20 calls, I talk to the 1 or 2 people that I get to talk to, I convert one of them to a lead, and even if nothing happens, I at least did the behavior. I was in control, and that control and that behavior put me into a position that allowed me to actually have control over the behavior, allowed me to drive it, and allowed my attitude to be much better even on one of those days, because I was able to focus on something I'm in control of. So if we focus on behavior, regardless of our attitude, regardless of how we feel, we're going to have a much better result. And earlier, I think I mentioned how I didn't think you could goal feelings. And I still, I'm not so sure about like how you would measure a feeling. But you can cookbook a feeling, which is really pretty good. So I'll give you one example. If you know, I'm a big person on happiness, and what is happiness, and where does it come from, and how do we figure out that contentment for ourselves. And there has been a lot of evidence within the psychology of happiness to show that certain behavior has a direct, significant effect on your happiness. And the one in particular, and I share this because it's so easy that you can do it, yourself. And they found in just 21 days of doing this 2-minute exercise, people's feelings of self-satisfaction, work satisfaction, family satisfaction increased significantly. And the exercise is this. This is the cookbook exercise for being happy. Every day, write down 3 things you're grateful for that occurred that day. And in 21 days, you'll find yourself in a whole different mental space. One of the people that was the absolute, she still is, but we don't live in the same town, but really, really close, very, very much a maternal mentor to me, really taught me nurturing extremely well. When we would have dinner at her house and her family, and was frequent, but every night that we'd have dinner, we'd do good things. And we would go around the table and we'd talk about what good things happened for us that day. And we'd laugh and we'd have fun, and it set the mood for good digestion, if nothing else. I know I've taken this practice into my companies when I have, like with the coffee shops, I would meet with the baristas every couple weeks, and before we would get into the details of the meeting, we'd start it with good things so we could hear what each person had over the last 2 weeks that maybe we didn't get to hear because we didn't get to see them. And it would set the meeting, and subsequent meetings got closer and warmer, and the whole attitude was wonderful. And so there are ways that you can cookbook or create a recipe for what you want in your life. And I'm most certainly available to help you figure that out. You can reach out to me anytime. But really, the work is on you. The work is on you going back to the Ikigai, figuring out what is it that you love? What is it that you're good at? What is it that the world needs? These are the kinds of things that if you don't spend time asking yourself this, if you don't spend time, tilling your mind and planting the seeds and nurturing those, how do you really expect it to fruit what you want it to fruit? And this is really what it really all boils down to. I mean, all of this goal stuff, all this stuff that we work with and talk, and if you know me, I talk about it all the time. The reason I do it is because it helps me keep farming my mind, and keep farming my mind. And there's a story about a man who he was driving down the road, and it was farm after farm, but he came across this one farm that was absolutely beautiful. It was well manicured, had beautiful flowers along the fence and beautiful bushes, and it was just an absolute beautiful farm. And he saw the farmer working on a fence post as he drove by, so he stopped. And he said, I just had to stop. After seeing your beautiful farm and how beautiful it is, I just wanted to let you know how graced you are and how lucky you are that God has graced you with such a beautiful piece of property. And he said, well, I'm not sure about God's grace. I am lucky to be here, but it most certainly took a lot of work to make it look like it is. And this is really the point. We all have had God's grace. This is why we're here, right? But what are we doing with the land that we've been given? What are we doing to be able to beautify it or make it the way that we want it? That's an Earl Nightingale story. And I'm going to close with one other Earl Nightingale story that I really have always liked. And I think this is really, ultimately, when I talk about farming your mind and I talk about goals and I talk about personal development, whatever it is that, if you know me, we've probably had some conversation within this. And this story encapsulates it for me the best. There was a man who was watching a sporting event on TV and didn't want to be distracted, and his young son, 3 or 4 years old, kept bothering him, kept wanting his attention. So he goes and grabs a magazine, and he flips through it, and he finds a page that has a picture of the planet Earth from out, and from space. So he rips it up into about 20 pieces, thinking it's a circle. This will keep the boy busy. He rips it up, says, here's the pieces, here's the tape, put it back together. And the boy comes back about 3 minutes later, and it's done. And the man's looking at it, and he's like, this is amazing. How were you able to do this so quickly? And the little boy took the piece of paper, and he flipped it over. And he said, see, Daddy, there's a man on the other side. And when I put the man together, the world fell into place. Guys, you are in a situation where you're being tested. There's no doubt in my mind. I'm speaking specifically to my friends in Minsk. There's no doubt in my mind the situation that you find yourselves in. This is a, I can't even understand the magnitude of what you guys are going through. But what I can tell you is that this type of turmoil can be extremely productive for the mind. That you can use this stress and leverage it to work for you. And if you want to know how, reach out to me. We'll talk about your specific situations. But even in the hardest and most difficult of times, we can find that flower or find that lily that gets us through. So I don't see any questions on the board. I'm assuming nobody had any questions through this. Hopefully it wasn't because I did something wrong and it wasn't working correctly. I'm very excited about 2021. I think that it can be a really, really great year, a year of restoration and change. And I most certainly hope that for everybody. So that being said, Happy New Year, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you next year. Take care.